Session 8, The Worry Buster.
One of the great aims of life is to achieve your own peace of mind. And the reason why so few people have peace of mind is because they don't set it as an important enough goal. And if they do, they don't take the time to understand what stands between them and peace of mind. Now, we talked earlier about one of the major obstacles, or major pairs of obstacles, are negative habit patterns. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection. Those rob us of an enormous amount of peace of mind. We also talked about feelings of guilt, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of undeservingness, and so on. They also rob us of peace of mind. And I want to talk in this session about the last, if you like, key to this discussion on negative emotions, what we call negative imagination. Now, the word negative imagination comes from an extensive body of literature that was written at the beginning of the century, but they found that negative imagination is something that we create in ourselves that causes us an enormous amount of stress and distress, if you like. Negative imagination creates fear. And one of the best definitions of fear that I've seen lately is what is called fantasized experiences appearing real. Fantasized experiences appearing real. In other words, these are experiences which we create in our minds and our imaginations, and we dwell upon them, and the more we dwell upon them, the more real they become to us. It's like I have 3 little children, and if I let them watch a scary movie, even if they insist upon it, they begin to feel that there are scary creatures under their beds and in their cupboards and so on. Is these fantasized experiences become real, and at one time, with little Michael, we couldn't get him to sleep in his bedroom at all because he was convinced that there were monsters in there. What do we call negative imagination? Well, another word for it is worry. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Now, what does that mean? It means that when we make decisions, we do away with worry. A study was done some years ago where many thousands of people were surveyed and asked what were they worrying about at the current time. And they accumulated it all up and they found this is what people worry about. 40% of the worries that people had were things that never happened. When they went back later, they found that the things they were worried about would never happen. They were going to be late, or they'd lose a job, or they wouldn't work out on a date or a relationship. The next figure, 30%, were things that were in the past, that had already happened and nothing could be done about. There were 12% of worries were worries about health. In most cases, needless worries. The thought that they had a pain or an illness or an ailment or something else that didn't turn out to be true. 10% of the things people worried about were petty worries. They were worried about whether or not they had enough change in the parking meter, whether or not someone would phone them. Really irrelevant worries. Only 8% of the worries were about anything substantial at all, and of those 8%, half, or 4%, were totally outside the control of the person. They were worried about whether Red China would invade northern Vietnam and things like that. I think the things that the person could have nothing to do about anyway. So basically, the research shows that as much as 96% of everything that we worry about or more is irrelevant. It never happens. It's not worth worrying about at all. But where does worry come from? Well, worry comes from a worry mentality. As a matter of fact, if you were brought up in a family where your mother or father was a worrier, they worried all the time, then you're probably a worrier too. It's a conditioned response. You saw them worrying, you want to be like your mommy and daddy because they're the most important people in your world, so you worry too. And I've seen little kids 4 and 5 years old that are really good, accomplished worriers, and they and their parents will sit together and worry, even though there's nothing involved. But it's fantasized experiences appearing real. Our job is to eliminate worry, and I'd like to give you 2 or 3 simple ideas that you can use. Number 1, which is one of the most popular of all, is just simply this. It's live one day at a time. Live one day at a time. Is don't worry about what might happen tomorrow. Don't worry about what may happen a year from now or 6 months from now. Just do the very best you can right now. There's a beautiful line from Teddy Roosevelt. He said something to the effect that do what you can where you are with what you have and don't worry about the rest. Do what you can where you are with what you have and don't worry about the rest. Live one day at a time. Just worry about getting through today and taking care of today. And as the Bible says, Let the morrow take care of itself. Sufficient unto the day are the cares thereof. Number 2 key to dealing with worry, and I have an enormous number of challenges that I face in my business life, is get the facts. This is so important. Get the facts. Not the apparent facts, not the quick facts, not the facts that seem obvious, but get the real facts. Take the time to look into a situation and find out what the real truth of the matter is. I have found that most worry situations evaporate if you get enough facts. You hear that somebody has done something or not done something. You hear about a change in your business or your personal life or change in one of your relationships. Find out. Call the person. Find from the right information source the answer, and you'll often find that the facts eliminate the worry. Most people who worry are people who would much rather worry than take the time to ask and find out what exactly is going on. Ask people, do your research, do your reading, do your homework, get the facts. One of the most important requirements, by the way, for your success in business or any other thing, any other field of endeavor, is to get the facts that you need so that your answers are accurate and up to date. Now, the third method is what I call the worry buster. The worry buster is a word or an expression that came from one of our graduates. He said this expression literally saved his business and saved his mental health. It's one of the simplest of all techniques, and it is just dynamite. It consists of 4 steps. All right, step number 1 is when you have something on your mind, define it clearly in writing. Define it clearly in writing. Sit down, take the time to write it out and say, what exactly is it that I'm worried about? And sit down and write it out. I am worried about this, and describe the situation exactly the way you see it. In medicine, they say that accurate diagnosis is 50% of the cure. Accurate diagnosis, defining it clearly in writing, is 50% of the cure. Now, an important point here is sometimes when you have what seems to be an overwhelming problem, you have more than one problem. You have what is called a cluster situation, where you have 2 or 3 or 4 problems all together. If you define it clearly in writing, sometimes you can write it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, that there are several little problems that are all together that are worrying you. And sometimes if you eliminate one of those difficulties, the rest of them evaporate. Sometimes one problem in a cluster of problems is the key, and all the others become irrelevant. So be alert to that, but define it clearly in writing. Number 2 is once you define it clearly, this is the key. Determine the worst possible outcome. Determine the worst possible outcome. In other words, ask yourself, what is the worst possible thing that could happen as a result of this situation? Left to itself, if the worst happened, what would it be? Determine the worst possible outcome. Now, an interesting thing happens here. We find that in worry, we are not worried or stressed by the event. An event does not trouble us. What troubles us is anticipation of an event and the resistance that we put up psychologically, wishing, hoping, praying that it doesn't take place. If psychologically we determine the worst possible outcome in writing, and you say the worst possible thing that can happen is this, and we make it concrete and we put it down on paper, you will find a remarkable thing. Your worries disappear. They just seem to evaporate as soon as we define the worst possible outcome. The stress comes from not wanting to face what it could be. We talk about this later, but it's the psychological phenomenon of denial. We deny, we don't want to put off. For instance, you have an investment, and the investment is getting worse and worse. So you have to say to yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen with this investment? And the worst thing is that you lose it all. Once you say, I lose it all, suddenly you're not so worried about it anymore, because, it just may happen. The third step, or let me go back a second, with regard to a relationship. Sometimes we're in a relationship that's very unhappy, and we say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen here? The worst thing that can happen here is that you lose the relationship. The relationship disappears. Then you have to ask yourself, will that kill me? Will the loss of the investment kill me? Will the loss of the job kill me? Will the loss of the relationship kill me? And the answer, of course, is no. You will recover from the loss of almost anything. So number 3, by the way, there are many people who get and have the signs of cancer, but they won't go to a doctor because they don't want to know. The stress of not knowing actually exacerbates the course of the disease, and finally when they do have to go to a doctor, it's gone so far the doctor can't save them. But the stress of not facing the possibility keeps them away from a doctor long past the point where a doctor could help them. Number 3 is resolve to accept the worst should it occur. Resolve to accept the worst should it occur. This is not passive and this is not fatalistic. Just say, if nothing could be done and this were to happen, I will accept it. I have a saying which I use that is, what cannot be cured must be endured. What cannot be cured must be endured. So you say, well, all right, if this happens, I'll accept it and I'll learn to live with it. I'm not going to let it break me. I'm not going to let it kill me. And then number 4 is begin immediately to improve upon the worst. Begin immediately to improve upon the worst. What does that mean? It means you now accepted that it might happen, and you've now decided that you will live with it should it occur, and now you do everything you possibly can to work back and make sure that the worst doesn't occur. In business, by the way, this is called the minimax regret analysis. It's minimizing the maximum regret. In other words, it's saying, what is the worst thing that can happen and how can I minimize that maximum regret? This minimax technique is a tremendous technique because it clears your mind considerably. And one of the best ways to use it is this really neat method. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the center and a line across the top, and then work down the page. And right on this side, write WPO. Right on this page, your definition. In other words, this is a clear definition of what's bothering you. On the top of this page, you write WPO, worst possible outcome. And then you write 1, and you say, I'm worried about this. And you write it out clearly, and then you write 1, you say the worst possible outcome is this. 2, I'm worried about this. 2, worst possible outcome is this. And so on. You'll find that every single time you do this, the problem just evaporates. And most, not all of course, but most of the stress or strain disappears. Your mind goes clear, and with a clear mind, you can then deal with it effectively. Now, the final point with regard to this whole idea of worry and negative imagination is, what is the antidote? What is the antidote to worry? What do you think it is? Well, it's simply this. It is purposeful action. The only real antidote to worry is purposeful action. Everything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action, where you can move, and as Shakespeare says, take arms against the sea of troubles, and by so doing end them. Anything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action will eliminate the worry. Why? Because of what we call the law of substitution. You cannot be working on a problem or a situation and thinking and acting purposefully to resolve it and still worry about it simultaneously. Worry almost always comes when you have too much time on your hands. Worry is a form of negative goal setting. Remember we talked about the law of concentration? It says whatever you dwell upon grows. Well, whenever you have a worry situation, what do you find yourself doing? What you find yourself doing is thinking about, talking about, dwelling upon, vividly imagining exactly what you don't want. By the law of expectations, is whatever you expect will come into your life. That which I greatly feared has come upon me, is what it says in the book of Job. Or the law of attraction says, you will attract into your life the people and circumstances in harmony with your dominant thoughts. The reason why we're taking a whole module to talk about worry is this, is that there are some people who don't worry about anything. This method, by the way, of determining the worst possible outcome, the worry buster, is also a tremendous method for decision making. When you go into any situation where you have to make a decision one way or another, the first question you should sit and ask, once you've analyzed it, is what's the worst thing that can happen? I remember the great J. Paul Getty, who at one time was one of the richest men in the world, said that this method of determining the worst possible downside was used by him as a decision-making method into every business deal he went to. What he went into, what he would do is he would say, no, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then he would make sure that the worst didn't happen. So make the decision right now that you're going to eliminate worry, fantasized experiences appearing real, that you're going to accept the worst possible outcome should it occur, and now get busy, do everything humanly possible to take constructive action to eliminate the worry situation and do away with it. That's the key to eliminating the final of the worst of our negative emotions.
This is the end of Side 2. Please fast forward the tape to the end to cue up Side 1 for your next listening.